Hello and welcome to this first proper episode of the UFOcast does Captain Scarlet, where we're looking at the opening episode of the series, The Mysterons. This is an episode that I have seen probably more times than most. As I said in the last episode, that's partly because it came out on Blu-ray before any of the rest of the series, and I got that with the Filmed in Super Mario Nation disc. Also, I forgot to mention this in my last episode, when I lived in Russia for a few years, I bought a handful of Jim Anderson episodes that had been dubbed into Russian just for the novelty of it. And the Captain Scarlet disc, again, was the first 3 episodes, I think. So it would have been The Mysterons, Winged Assassin, and Big Ben Strikes Back. So I would have watched it then. I'm not sure I particularly got through all of them, even with the dub. I seem to recall that I learnt the Russian verb to eject, because Captain Scarlet ejects, and I think his destiny goes, Captain Scarlet has ejected. So that is katapultiravаться, if anybody is interested. That aside, is it a good opening episode for a new series? I think largely it is. It starts with that great opening sequence of discovering the Mysteron city on Mars. It looks amazing. There's some visual stuff in there, particularly there's that kind of spirally column that the camera goes past, and I have no idea how that was done. It looks amazing. And then this conflict, which will drive the rest of the series, begins. I showed my wife not that long ago the first episode of Stingray, and she was immediately critical of Commander Shaw, the whole something's gone wrong, we're going to bomb the seabed aspect of the show in that first episode of Stingray. And you see that again here, and it's the thing that basically drives the rest of the series. The assumption that those fan-like things that the Mysterons point at the Earth ship are hostile actions, and thus Captain Black is right, no, we're going to blow them up. And obviously there's part of you that goes, well, if they didn't do that, then you wouldn't have a series. It feels a bit shoot first, ask questions later, but I think I'm prepared to forgive it because you have to keep the series off somehow. And then from there we have this thing that will set up the rest of the series. You're told about it in the voiceover at the beginning. Fate will make him indestructible, and then in every subsequent episode, Fate has made him indestructible. Captain Scarlet. And I think it's interesting, actually, that essentially the hero of episode 1 of Captain Scarlet is not Captain Scarlet himself. He doesn't really become the hero until actually the second half of episode 2, which we will talk about next time. But essentially, Captain Blue is the hero of this episode, shooting Scarlet off the top of Carview, rescuing the president, so that the Mysterons don't ultimately carry out their threat. I suppose the darkness on show, you're introduced to Captain Brown and Captain Scarlet. You know that the show is about Captain Scarlet, but he becomes a villain, and Captain Brown becomes a Mysteron agent and is blown up, and you're like, who's safe? You've gone from Thunderbirds, where it's all about rescuing people, and listeners, write in if you are aware of this. I don't think anybody ever dies in Thunderbirds. I might be wrong about that. There's definitely whichever one that is with the plane crashing into the thing where they think they have failed, but then it's like, no, we've succeeded. Do let me know if there is an episode of Thunderbirds where anybody actually dies. So you've gone from that, which is all about rescuing people, to this, where seemingly anybody can be killed and, as we discover, turned into a Mysteron agent. So it's a really dark beginning. I really enjoy it. It's a great way to kind of dive into the series and to set up this conflict, which will drive the show. And now it's time for this week's Spectrum Agent Report. This week, hearing from my brother John.
So, the very first episode of Captain Scarlet, simply titled The Mysterons. It starts off with a similar sequence to what will follow on all subsequent episodes, but this time with a massive spoiler by saying, this is Captain Scarlet, who Fate will make indestructible. Well, that takes away some of the mystery of the first programme, certainly. But then we move on. We see the destruction of the Mysteron base on Mars and everything that causes, leading to the first Mysteron threat to assassinate the world president. I guess programmes of that time probably all had this idea that in the future there would be a world president. Well, unlikely. I don't think that's ever going to happen, to be honest. Spectrum is already all in place. It kind of asked the question, what was the purpose of Spectrum before the Mysteron threat was discovered? What were they there for? What were they protecting people from? I think it's nice that we find that in the scene where Captain Scarlet's body is dragged along by the new Captain Scarlet is that these are recreations. They aren't reanimations or zombies, if you like, which is an interesting take on things. I love the self-exploding Captain Brown. And then later the fact that they say that they want to get the world president alive. If they were really going to kill him, then they could have done that a number of times over, which all leads into this idea that it is a war of nerves which they are pursuing rather than an actual war where they are going to destroy stuff, even though their first threat is that in the long run they will destroy all life on Earth. But I think effectively the Mysterons are just toying with the people on Earth, because if they were serious about it, then they could destroy everybody extremely easily. And so all of this is just trying to mess with the heads of Earthmen everywhere as they discover this potential threat. The reveal of the SPV is very Thunderbirds, but preceded by a really clunky piece of exposition of, oh, you must be really clever to be able to drive something when you're sitting backwards watching it in a TV screen. And it's like, well, not really. If you're looking at the screen and you're steering, that's the same as if you were looking at the road the other way round, basically. But it is a nice touch that when Captain Blue's going up the swirly round and round car view, you do see that the scenery is going in the right direction compared to him backwards, which I like. I do always think about the first episode of Captain Scarlet when going into the multi-story car park in the centre of Bristol, because it has round and roundy up and down driving bits, and that always puts me in mind of this episode. And then finally, Captain Scarlet falls off, but he's found. He recovers. There's no explanation ever given, I don't think, as to why. It's just happened, and that's good, and he'll be leading the fight, etc. And then we have the very exciting end titles, where I noticed that in one of the pictures he's got inaccurately green coloured eyes when they're clearly blue on screen and in all the other illustrations. And then there's the fact that they're all very exciting scenarios, but sadly we never get to see them. None of those things ever happen in the series. You have scenes of serious peril, such as sharks, such as the walls with spikes closing in on him, and then there's the one of some crates falling out of a window, which might possibly land on him. So it's a good start to a series. It brings in a whole load of elements which will become commonplace, and it's an enjoyable piece of television of that era.
And if you'd like to be a Spectrum agent in a future episode, please visit ufocast.co.uk/captain to sign up for one of the remaining slots. So those are my brief thoughts on the episode. Let's go for the things that I said we were going to look out for over the course of this run. From a continuity perspective, this is the first episode. Whichever order you watch them in, you have to start with this one, because this is the trigger. This is what starts it all off. So we have to start here. As this is the first episode, we do obviously have a whole raft of new Mysteron powers. We have the retrometabolism that is a hallmark of the Mysterons. They destroy somebody and recreate it. Or I suppose in the initial instance, their city is destroyed and they recreate it. It doesn't get called retrometabolism until episode 2 when Dr. Thorne names it, but that is essentially the power that we have. We also have this weird aspect of taking over somebody without destroying them, which seems to be what happens to Captain Black. One moment he's sitting there, and then the puppet changes, and he's got that face, that distorted face that we will recognise for the rest of the show, and that Mysteron voice. I don't think that ever happens again. We will see, but that is a Mysteron power in this episode. We have I'd always thought that Captain Brown was a human bomb, and that essentially was a power that he had. The dialogue from Colonel White suggests that he had smuggled a bomb in somehow on his person, but the whole point of going through those detectors was to detect stuff like that. So I've always remembered it that Captain Brown is a human bomb. It's just another thing that Mysterons can do. So I'm going to say that's a Mysteron power, new Mysteron power in this episode. There's the whole flying things remotely, and particularly in this episode, it's not obvious that they destroy the helicopter beforehand to take it over. again, we see that in subsequent episodes where they destroy a plane and it becomes theirs that they can control. But in this episode, it just appears that they've taken it over and the pilots are missing. So those are our Mysteron powers for this episode. Mysteron's still at large. Obviously, Captain Brown blows himself up and is no more, but Captain Black is at large at the end of the episode. And Captain Scarlet briefly is a Mysteron agent, but is back on our side by the end of the story. Is it a win or a loss or a draw? I mean, I'm going to go for the fact that it's a draw. It's largely a win for Spectrum in that the Mysterons fail in their objective. They do not kill the world president, but Captain Brown is lost, and London car feuders get blown up. It's probably slightly in the win for Spectrum category, but there is an aspect of things where they lose. And look out for the Mysteron Puppets section on the blog, UFOcast.co.uk. This episode we have Captain Brown, Captain Scarlet and Captain Black are all Mysteron agents. Thank you for joining me in this run-through of Captain Scarlet. I will be back at the same time next week looking at Winged Assassin.